there were instances where this book was taken off the shelves of libraries and destroyed, burned on Twitter. There were conservative news pundits like Sean Hannity of Fox News who wrote an article saying how dangerous my book was, how it was coming to get your children and to turn them into Hamas sympathizers. He also said that it was so dangerous because it was so well written, which I took as a compliment.
Hi, Hannah Moushabeck. Do I say it correctly?
You do, yeah, like great
Yeah,
pronunciation.
thank you. So Hannah is a second generation Palestinian American author and book worker who was raised in a family of publishers and booksellers, and she has worked for over a decade and her debut picture book, Homeland, My Father Dreams of Palestine, won the New England Book Award and the Arab American Book Award. And now the book is available for the first time in Portuguese for both Brazilian and Portuguese readers with the title A Nossa Terra. Homeland is a story about a Palestinian family that celebrates their homeland through the tradition of storytelling. And it's also about displacement and loss, but it resonates far beyond the Palestinian community, right, Hannah? Why do you think it's relevant to tell this kind of stories to young audiences now?
Well, this book came about because of a conversation that I had with my friend who's actually Vietnamese. And she was talking about how she had never been to Vietnam, and that even if she had visited Vietnam, it would look so different from the homeland that her family left behind, that in a sense, the only way for her to visit the Vietnam of her parents' generation was through the stories that they told. And I felt like that was exactly the case for my family as well. My family was exiled from Palestine in 1948 after what we call the Nakba, which means the catastrophe in Arabic, where over 750,000 Palestinians were expelled from their homelands. And my family, locked their doors thinking that they would return home in a few days and never went back to their house to this day. So what Palestine looked like in 1948 is all but almost completely erased from what modern day Israel and occupied Palestine look like. So it is through the stories that my father told me at bedtime, that my aunts and my uncles would tell over dinner, or that my grandmother would whisper to me under the covers at night, that I learned about my homeland at all. And it is something that I continue to cherish and value because oral storytelling has such a long, like centuries old tradition in Arab culture. So I'm so honored to be able to take part in that and also to transfer it to a book where hopefully other children will go home and ask their own families, what are our family stories? And, how can we celebrate where we come from?
Yeah, that's amazing. And how was the book received, Hannah? The book was released first in 2023, right?
That's right.
How was the reception, and did the reception of the book change it in light of the unfolding genocide in Palestine right now?
Of course. I should add some context that when my book was released in 2023, the last time a picture book about Palestine had been published was 30 years prior. So we had gone decades and decades without seeing a single book to even list the word Palestine in its pages. So the reception was really mixed, depending on who you spoke to. When Palestinians or Muslims or Arabs saw it, they were just so emotional. I mean, I can't tell you how many events that I did where children would be giggling and having a good time, and parents would be in the back, sobbing, just so grateful for the representation and to just have their existence acknowledged. I received hundreds of letters and text messages and DMs on Instagram from people who just really, really cherish seeing their own culture represented in the pages of a book. Of course, there was also people who felt like that Palestinians don't exist and that I had no right to write this book. There were instances where this book was taken off the shelves of libraries and destroyed, burned on Twitter. There were conservative news pundits like Sean Hannity of Fox News who wrote an article saying how dangerous my book was, how it was coming to get your children and to turn them into Hamas sympathizers. He also said that it was so dangerous because it was so well written, which I took as a compliment. But, I think the people that really count, which are the kids and the teachers and the librarians who know children's book and enjoy children's book, they really loved it. Kids always tell me their favorite part in the book is the fart, that that they love it. They think it's, the most hilarious thing. But I think a lot of grown-ups also have used this book not just to have discussions about Palestine and about what's happening there now, but also about displaced families in general. What are the reasons that families get displaced? What happens when a family gets displaced or has no home to go to? What as a society should we do to help them? And I think that those are really relevant conversations right now to almost everyone in the country. These are things that we're facing a lot, certainly in the United States, but also in an increasingly global world with mass migration and climate disaster. I think that it can always help to remind children that we as global citizens are responsible for our neighbors and taking care of one another.
I will admit that my favorite part is the fart as well.
I love that. I know. My nephew says I should have had three more farts in the book. He was.
Yeah, more farts, please.
Mhm.
And did you are you still battling censorship in schools, or are you doing readings? How is it going now? I know it's like been 3 years now, but I know we work so many years on a book, and we are still working on it. And how is it now for you? How are you working the book?
Yeah, I would say here in the US, the attempts to censor voices and ban books is only escalating. It's being now considered in several bills in the government, which, if they were to pass, books would be able to be banned on a national level. So that's really frightening. But I have to say that also the response by community members has been astounding. So every time I was invited to speak somewhere and then subsequently banned, a community group nearby, whether that was a group like Jewish Voices for Peace or, a Palestinian solidarity group or librarians and teachers, they would rise up to make sure that I had a place to speak as as an alternative to the venue that banned me. So I've had some really wonderful experiences, some just outrageous. I was invited to a university in North Carolina to speak during Banned Book Week about my experiences being banned. And then 2 days before I spoke, they said, by the way, you're not allowed to read your book. Which is which is wild because yes, I was banned, yeah, during the banned book event, which was really, really surprising, but made a great lesson. I can tell you that before my book was banned, I probably would have had 10 college students attend that event, about a children's book. And suddenly, when the college said, oh, her book is too dangerous to read to college students, the room was packed. There were like people, and I read it anyway. I went ahead and I read it anyway because, I'm an independent adult, and I was like, what's the worst that they're going to do? Are they going to arrest me, throw me off campus? Okay, like that's fine. So it's been really wild. I think people have been getting organized in ways that they never have before, and that's really exciting to see. For example, I visited a local school in my town where I am one of very few local authors. I was invited to a school to speak, and there were just a few parents who were really outraged and upset by this. And when they wrote, op-eds for a local paper, a group of administrators and teachers got together and they wrote an open letter. In fact, 173 of them in my town, almost 100% of the teachers in my town got together to write an open letter in response to the criticism, defending my book and defending my visit. And so I have to say that, like, while these attempts to censor me have been ever constant, the voices who are challenging that have been getting louder and louder, and it's really exciting to see.
Yeah. Community is always the answer, right? What was the most challenging aspect of telling this particular story to you in that format specific, like for children? Did you leave something out? How did you work this, like the specific? Because yeah, it's difficult to tell these stories for children and don't make them overwhelmed. But how was it for you? What was challenging for you?
I felt a deep responsibility to get the story right, not only because it was my family's legacy, but also because there hadn't been a Palestinian picture book published in 30 years. So I felt like, oh gosh, like I really need to to get this right, or I don't want to mess it up and then they go another 30 years without publishing another book on Palestine. So I was really, really careful about my language. And I remember I kept trying to write what had happened to my family in a way that was appropriate for children. And I thought about my own family and I thought about other families who had experienced displacement and just how different they were, and how it really needs to be a conversation that you have in your own family at whatever level your child is ready to hear it. And I didn't want to rob families of the opportunity to have those conversations. So my goal really was to create an environment where kids were asking the questions. They were asking, what happened to this family? And then they were going and doing their own independent research, because I didn't feel like I had the right to tell them, depending on where they were in their learning journey, exactly what had happened. Because of course, like, it's a very upsetting thing to learn about exile, to learn about occupation, to learn about genocide. um, I also knew there was that part of it. I also knew that I would be under an extreme amount of scrutiny. No matter what I said, it would be taken out of context, it would be picked apart, and it would be criticized. And after my years and years of experience as a bookseller and reading stories to kids, I knew that the best way to engage children was to read a story right up into the exciting part and the climax, and then shut the book and say, oh, I guess we're not going to know. And to watch children run as fast as they could to get that book and to read it themselves and find out what happens at the end. I knew that there was some power in that. And if I really, really wanted to inspire kids to learn more about Palestine, I should not tell them what happened. I should tell them everything that happened around it, how we felt, but just say, it was a sad story. And that's exactly what happened. It's incredible. I read my book to hundreds of kids all over the country, and that is the first question out of any kid's mouth is, what happened? And then I can have conversations in real time. Especially I think since the genocide started, families have already had a lot of these conversations with kids, because kids are absorbing things constantly around them and they know something is happening, and you want to be able to explain it in a child-friendly way that's not going to scare them, but it's also going to explain the realities of the world. Um, but it's really incredible because it's one of the things that has been criticized about my book, because they say, not to quote Sean Hannity again from Fox News, but he says, this book is dangerous because it makes kids ask questions about Palestine. And that's exactly what I was going for. And I feel like I don't know that I could have achieved it the same way. You know, kids, they want to investigate themselves. You can't just tell them the truth, and they shouldn't. You know, they should be taught to question everything and to do their own research. So I'm really hoping by leaving out my family's personal Nakba story that A, families can insert their own and they can talk about their own experiences, and B, kids will be curious and want to learn more about the reality of what happened.
Yeah, kids asking questions is a very dangerous thing to promote, right?
According to Fox News, it is, yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, my next question was, what do you hope your book changes? Or let's say, what did you hope your book would change when you're writing it? Because now I know that it's already changing. So I want to know, what were you thinking when you're writing?
Gosh, I had a lot of hopes for this book. I mean, I think on a personal level, I wanted my family's story to be told. Palestinians are so often gaslit about the realities of things that are happening to them or that happen to them. We're always told, oh, this isn't a genocide, or oh, this is not occupation, or no, you weren't exiled, you know, you had a choice, you could have stayed. I wanted our story to be told in a way that was indisputable because it is memoir. You know, I had complete control over what was in those pages. If you're picking up my book, you're reading my story. And there was something about the book format that had a level of permanence. You know, every book that's published in the United States gets sent to the Library of Congress and like ends up on a shelf in the official documentation of the United States. And there was something really powerful about that that felt like you could not deny this reality because it was written on ink on page. And that was sort of one of my initial really strong hopes. I was I also was selfish in the sense that my sisters were having babies and I didn't want to gift them the 30-year-old book that I had read as a kid, which is a great book. I love it. I still read it, but I wanted them to be able to see themselves and to see our story represented in the books on their shelves. And then, you know, it sort of grew as the book was written. I really wanted to force open the doors of publishing so that other Palestinians could be published because it had been so long. And I think that because I was so entrenched in the industry, you know, I was actually working. Um, I had worked at Chronicle Books several years before they actually bought my book. So I knew everyone there. And I think it really helped them take a chance on my book when other publishers I don't think would have touched it. And now, you know, since my book has been published, we've now seen dozens and dozens of books about Palestine come out for children. And that's what I wanted. I didn't want my story to be the only one that was being told. You know, there's so many ways in which I am not representative of the majority of Palestinians. You know, I'm a Christian Palestinian. The majority of Palestinians are Muslim. You know, I have never been there. I've never been able to visit Palestine. So you know, I really wanted there to just be a plethora of Palestinian stories. And like, we are really on the way to seeing that. We're seeing dozens come out every year, and it's really exciting.
Yeah, for sure. It was difficult for me to pick one book about Palestinian for kids, but yours, it was my favorite since the beginning. Exactly because it doesn't tell the whole story. You see only your story, and then you have to go after research or imagine what really happened, right? And that's what attracted me to this book. It's really great. Yeah, and I've been following you on social media, so I know you're pregnant also.
Yes, I
It's
am.
it's your first child,
Mhm.
right?
Yeah.
How do you feel that your relationship with children's books is going to change? Are you working on more children's books for your future child?
Yes, you know, it's interesting. My partner and I have been setting up the nursery, and there's so many books that I want to include in my child's collection of books, and it's embarrassing. We have like hundreds and hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of picture books, particularly. But there was also a collection of books that I said, nope, these are not my child's books. These are my special books because I really do believe that picture books are for all ages. And I was really excited to like be able to offer them such a more diverse collection than I ever had when I was a child. You know, my favorite books growing up were like The Giving Tree and Millions of Cats and Corduroy. These were all books that were penned and illustrated by white, mostly men, you know, some women, but really never depicted my reality. They were always an escape from the reality that I grew up in and lived in. I'm very excited for my child to be able to literally see their ancestors in the pages of a book. I think that's the ultimate goal when writing your own story. But I'm also hopeful too that there's going to be so many more books that are coming out in the next few years that show the changes that are happening right now. Things are changing so fast. The world's perception of Palestine is changing so fast. And I have continued to write, and my next book is looks not at the past of what happened in Palestine, but what I hope to see in the future. It's called When Palestine is Free, and it really is a practice in sort of manifesting radical futures of collective liberation.
That's amazing. I am so curious to read it.
Yes, I can't wait. We yeah, it's with a publisher. We've just got first sketches in, so it's in the early stages.
I also have my library of children's books, which is separated from my son's books. And just this weekend, he found it and he asked me, Daddy, why are you keeping these books for me? And I told him, yeah, these are my books.
Don't touch them.
Yeah, but then he took everything
Of
and now
course.
he's reading them. Yeah, because
Oh,
I do some research on, I'm interested in how urban mobility is represented in children's books. That's what interests me right now. So I try to have as many books about this as I can. But you, I've seen some interviews about you also, Hannah, and you've spoken about publishing as a queer, fat Palestinian woman. I would like to ask you how those identities that you're speaking from inform your writing and also your presence in this children's literature world.
that's a great question. Yeah, you know, I think it's hard to sort of isolate what which parts of my identity like inform the writing that I do because of course it's all just an amalgamation of me. But I have to say that I've been parts of lots of different communities, marginalized communities. You know, I have a lot of roots in queer circles, queer activism, in fat activism and fat liberation spaces, and also, of course, in Palestinian liberation spaces. And growing up, I really had to keep those separate, mostly because I don't think that, you know, queer spaces or fat spaces were ready to talk about Palestine and vice versa. And so it was, I was living a very segmented life. You know, I would have my friends and community over here and different community over here. And when the genocide started, I just could not tolerate being cut apart in these different ways. I very quickly, you know, I lost some friends who, you know, didn't, you know, Palestinians who didn't believe in queer liberation or queer folks who didn't believe in fat liberation or Palestinian liberation. But I can now say that I have managed to weave together all of these communities where people see the interconnection of collective liberation. You know, we say collective liberation not because we believe in liberation for only one type of person, one body type, one sexuality, one religion, one ethnicity. You know, you really have to live that completely if you want to work towards it. And we've seen in the last 3 years the incredible work by fat liberation groups, by queer liberation groups, speaking up for Palestinian liberation in this incredible showing that I have felt so inspired because a lot of these groups, they understand marginalizations, they understand the gaslighting that happens in our media, in our power structures, suffering under capitalism here in the United States. They all understand the same struggles. And so when we're able to support one another, like collectively, we are just so much more powerful. So while it makes its way into my children's books in very small ways, like, my new book has like a pride flag in it and they have body diversity in the characters and all, of course they're all Palestinian. It really influences more my adult writing and my work as a book worker because I work for an independent publisher, and the books that I am acquiring often deal with these intersections. Like I want to be able to publish stories and voices that hold these complexities together, but all have a central theme of liberation for all. So it's certainly been a long evolutionary journey from being like a, closeted teenager to an out proud person on the internet. But I'm about to publish our first queer Palestinian anthology next month. And the reception has been so incredible. And so many of those stories in this queer Palestinian anthology also focus on fat liberation. It's really no coincidence to see all of these threads come together. So it's been hugely influential.
That's so nice to hear. Yeah, I am excited to read the Palestinian anthology, right? Yeah, I was searching the Interlink website for some books, and I am interested in all of the books you publish.
Yes,
Actually,
that's a
yeah,
good sign.
yeah. Thank you, Hannah. Yeah, because I actually started my publishing, like micro small publishing company last year to publish my book about mobility and another friend's book about also screen usage and imagination. And I really wanted to be about these topics that we need to discuss with kids today. Like, I love the old children's books, they're amazing. I love them. But I think there is something missing right now. Do you feel the same?
I do. I think in past generations, there's been this effort to sort of hide the truth of the world from children. But I have found that children are actually so much more capable of dealing with the realities of the world and also seeing the truth and identifying fairness far more easily than adults. When I go into schools and I talk about Palestine, I talk about what happened to my family, what's happening to families now, it's so immediate. Kids are like, that's not fair. We should do something to change that. And it's so beautiful because I can lecture adults for hours with the same exact information, and they will continue to, oh, well, it's so complicated, or maybe this violence is deserved. There's all of this um, you know, this influence that has affected adults where they cannot identify just the simple truths of right and wrong. And kids have a really incredible way of pinpointing it so exactly. And I think as long as you're using language that children will understand, they can like see through big concepts. I really feel like, and of course I'm not a parent yet, so we'll see how it goes, but I really feel like there isn't a question that my child would be able to ask that I would say, "Oh, we're not going to talk about this until you're older." Like I think that they should be encouraged to ask every question and to understand the world as it exists in this moment without trying to scare them or to traumatize them. I think there's a way to talk about almost every topic. We published a book last year called Let's Talk About Abortion for Children because that we found it was written by two abortion doulas. They found that in their work, there were so many, the vast majority of women who were getting abortions already had children and wanted to be able to talk to their children about what was happening, why they were ending a pregnancy. And so we published a book that would help families do that. And I think that even though that feels very alarming to a lot of adults, I think that when you can have these conversations with kids, they are equipped so much better to enter the world and be better humans and better citizens and better community members.
Yeah, I agree. Thank you so much, Hannah. You're so inspiring.
Amazing. Well, thank you so much for taking a chance on my book. I can't wait to see it. And I'm so grateful to meet you.
Me too, Hannah. Thank you so much for your time. Bye bye.
Bye.